We'll go ahead and get started with our next session of using land bank tools and TIF for housing. We have Ann Giroux here as a speaker today. She is the county's finance director and is also currently the chair of the Michigan Association of Land Bank Authorities. And we're really grateful for her knowledge and for her being able to join us today. Land bank tools are a fairly new and I think really important tool in addressing housing needs. But because they are kind of new, there's often a lot of questions about how they work and how they might apply to housing. But Anne, with her experience at the county and with the Michigan Association of Land Bank Authorities, has a lot of information to share, and I think some great ideas about how to apply this tool to housing in Marquette County. Before I get started, I guess one thing just to reiterate, I touched on real quickly in my introduction, but we have very limited tools at the local level for dealing with housing, and the Land Bank Authority tools, I think, give us some unique options and flexibility in terms of how we address housing. So I'm really glad to have Ann here today to talk about how that can work in Marquette County. So Ann?
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all seeing the sunshine like I am wherever you are. It's nice to see that today. As Sarah mentioned, I'm currently serving as the Marquette County Finance Manager, but I also serve as the Director of the Land Bank Authority and the County Brownfield Authority. And so it's with those hats that I'm really speaking to you today. The County Land Bank Authority, I'm going to talk a little bit about what land banks are, talk about some of the ways that we've dipped our toes in the water a little bit with housing already, and then also talk about some of the tools that we're exploring, as Sarah mentioned, that can be pretty powerful local ways to address this problem. So this is just kind of a national definition from the Center for Community Progress. Land banks are public entities with unique governmental powers created pursuant to state enabling legislation that are solely focused on converting problem properties into productive use according to local community goals. And I think it's important to understand that there are land banks all across the country, but the state legislation that enables them can be very different from one state to another. And so even though we're all kind of doing the same thing and dealing with vacant properties, how land banks function and operate can be very different from one state to another. But essentially, land banks really, through these state statutes, are given some pretty special powers, including the ability to hold land tax-free, clear title, so to go through what's called a quiet title process to clean up title issues, negotiate sales, and convey property, just to name a few. So kind of drilling down now to the state of Michigan. And what you see on your screen now is a map showing the county land bank authorities in the state of Michigan. So the green are those counties that have a land bank, and the kind of gray colors is those that don't. I will mention there's only one city that's allowed to create a land bank in the state of Michigan, and that is the city of Detroit. And so otherwise, land banks are created at the county level. And I did want to also mention that we have a state land bank authority, and that state land bank authority can do work in any of those gray counties that don't have a county land bank. So regardless of whether your county has a land bank or not, the tools are still available to you to use. Important to note that we now have about half of the UP that's represented with a county land bank authority, and I know the state has been active in some of those counties that don't have a land bank. We're a very diverse group, and I've been serving as the president of the Michigan Association of Land Banks for over a year now, and boy, we're very different from one county to the next in terms of the kind of work that we do. I consider Marquette to be somewhat of a small to mid-sized land bank. We tend to be very active. However, when I meet with my colleagues from the city of Detroit or Flint or Saginaw, and I hear about how many properties are in their inventory, it tends to make my eyes glaze over. So a lot of diversity amongst land banks in Michigan. Some of the smaller land banks have really just created the land bank, and it's a tool sitting on the shelf so that if they need it, it's there. So varying levels of activity from one county to the next, for sure. So in terms of government and legislation. The Land Bank Enabling Act just goes back to 2003. So it really is quite new in terms of how governments work and how legislation comes to be. And it really started back in Genesee County with the issues that the city of Flint was having with kind of the departure of the automotive industry. And they were faced with a lot of blighted and vacant properties and a loss of population in the city of Flint. And that's kind of where this whole land banking movement started. And Michigan really was the first state that you started to see land banks being created. I believe our legislation was the first to be adopted. The county treasurer at the time, who was Dan Kildee and is now a U.S. representative, really had a vision for how land banks could deal creatively with these problem properties and the things that they were seeing happening in the city of Flint. So land banks were given, again, some pretty important tools. The ability to acquire and hold and dispose of properties, the power to pursue expedited quiet title action, which I mentioned before, and the room to be really creative in finding new productive uses for once forgotten property. Land banks are really designed to promote economic growth, and our overall mission with our land bank authority is always to improve tax base. How does it affect taxable value? Whether it's tearing down a blighted vacant property and it's improving the values of the adjoining properties, or whether it's actually supporting an economic development project to create new tax base. That really is our goal, is to improve tax base and improve economic growth. So again, we can receive, acquire, hold, manage, develop, sell, convey property, facilitate the reuse of vacant, blighted property, obsolete and abandoned property, eliminate the loss of local control due to typical property tax auctions, assemble land for redevelopment, because we're a smaller authority with a pretty light inventory. We don't do a lot of land assembly, but some of the larger land banks do assemble land for larger redevelopment projects. The key why we're here today is to support and participate in local affordable housing initiatives and to layer with other redevelopment tools, such as brownfield and others. And I will be talking quite a bit through the presentation about brownfield and how the Land Bank Act and the Brownfield Act kind of play off of each other and work together. So now drilling down to Marquette County. Our mission is there. Mission of the Marquette County Land is to work collaboratively with local governmental units and community organizations in determining the best way to return taxable foreclosed properties to the tax roll while eliminating blight, providing affordable housing and economic development opportunities, and revitalizing communities. Some of the points I want to make and pull out of that mission statement, the emphasis on local governmental units. We have been really proud, our authority has been really proud of the fact that we do work all over Marquette County. At one point, we had a map in one of our annual reports, little stars showing all the projects that we did to kind of show how we touch all the way out to Michigami, down to Republic, to Sawyer, Gwinn, and up through the three cities in the core. So we're very proud of that fact, and we really do make an effort to make sure all of the municipalities in Marquette County know about us and what we do and how we can help them. And we are never going to do a project that they don't support. The land bank, we really feel like we're here to promote their community development goals and their economic development goals. We're not just out there willy-nilly picking projects that we want to get involved in. It is always driven from that local community level. So we were created in 2009, and so prior to my becoming the county finance manager a couple of years ago, I was the county treasurer for 12 years. I started there in 2007, and it didn't take me long to see the ramifications of what was happening with some of our tax auctions. So just to digress a little bit and talk about the tax sale process and why the land bank was created here. What happens with tax foreclosed properties? And just to give you an idea, Marquette County Treasurer usually forecloses on 20 to 40 properties each year. Some of them have value, quote unquote value. Some of them are really problem properties. They're blighted dwellings. They're small little lots that nobody really wanted anymore. Maybe it's a swamp parcel, what have you. What I saw happening through the auction process is that people buy anything, right? We had a lot of non-local speculation going on, and the properties that we got that had potential, that were worthy of reinvestment, tended to attract somebody who was going to invest in them. But these other problem properties, they would be bought up by somebody who never saw it. They're buying it sight unseen. They're not local. They have no intention to invest in the property. They have no intention to even pay the taxes on it. They're hoping to throw it on eBay and make $100. Basically, that's what was happening. The Land Bank Authority gave us a way and a tool to step into that process and deal more responsibly with those properties. And that was really why we created it in 2009. We saw what was happening and how it was being used in places like Genesee County and Ingham County. And we wanted to be able to use those tools here in Marquette County as well. So we have a 5-member board that meets monthly. What's interesting about that is we actually started out with 3 members. Myself as county treasurer and 2 other members. Those 2 other members are still with us today. And about 6, 7, 8 years ago, we expanded our board to 5 members. Those other 2 that were added on are still with us today. So I think that's kind of telling about the passion that our board has for this work, and how we really feel like we're making an impact in the county, and they stick with us, and it's a great group to be a part of. So other than the county treasurer changing, our other board members stay the same, which is interesting. We've received almost 1.4 million in grant funding, largely for blight elimination over the past 10 years. It's a big number, and it's done a lot of good in the county. Our 2021 projected fund balance is 211,000, and I throw that on there just to point out that, like many government entities, we're not sitting on a lot of money. Our resources are very limited. It makes it very challenging to do the work that we do. We are, like I said, a small to mid-sized authority that's really trying to be creative with how we get work done. Some of our statistics are on this slide. You can see that since inception, we've acquired 180 properties, most of those through the tax foreclosure process, some of them outright acquisition. We have demolished 102 properties during that time frame, which is, having been the one that managed all those demo contracts, it's a big number. We're very proud of that. We've had a big impact in the communities that we've worked in. 55 side lot transfers, 61 sales to private ownership, and then 5 transfers to local government. So we kind of started out doing a lot of demo work, not unlike a lot of other land banks in the state. That really was kind of our bread and butter. And when people, if you are on the call and you've heard about a land bank before, you probably think of us as the people that demo blighted structures around the county, right? That's changed, and I do want to talk about that a little bit. It's changed not only for Marquette County, but it's changed across the rest of the state as well for a variety of reasons, largely because funding is really limited now. And so we really rely on partnerships here in Marquette County. Our municipal partners are fantastic. We a lot of times have a cost sharing arrangement with them on tax foreclosed parcels where they pay for half of the demo, we pay for half. It stretches our dollars further and allows us to do a lot more work that way. We do focus on tax foreclosed parcels when it comes to demo. I often get questions, would you accept this donation? Well, no, we're not going to accept a blighted property without a funding source to remove it. So we definitely focus on tax foreclosed parcels. Those are the parcels that we are forced to deal with as a government agency. So of course, that's our focus. And again, brownfield demolition is a brownfield eligible expense. So we have used brownfield plans to fund the demolition that we do. So again, as I touched on, I wanted to talk about this shift away from demo and toward development. It's really kind of been happening over the past several years. As I said, not just here in Marquette County, but across the state. For one, there are fewer demo dollars available. For a while, the state of Michigan, through their hardest hit funds and other programs, were offering quite a bit of demolition funding to land banks and local municipalities. And a lot of that has dried up now. So the resources just aren't there for demo. But again, we think back to our goal of improving tax base. And if you think about tearing a structure down, yes, tearing that structure down has an impact on the taxable value of the surrounding properties, right? They're better off without that property there, but that's a long-term prospect. for their values to raise that much because of that blighted structure being gone. Essentially, when you remove a building, you're removing tax base. Now you're taxing a vacant lot. And so land banks have really been trying to think, okay, what can we do with this vacant lot inventory? Instead of just doing side lot sales to adjoining property owners and having this vacant lot on the tax roll, we really need to start thinking about development and how we can improve that tax base. Coincidentally, we have this housing issue that we've been talking about. So land banks are really in a great position with their inventories to allow for housing development and attainable housing development. So this first project that I've got on the screen is one that we've been working on for a really long time. This property on Osprey Court in Marquette, which if you're not familiar with where that is, it's kind of behind Econo Foods, heading down McClellan, heading south on McClellan. I foreclosed as county treasurer on this property in 2011. So it's been a while. This was kind of, I would call it part of a failed condo development. The developers at that site had plans to build a 12-unit condo, and phase 2 was to be an 8-unit condo right next door. The 12-unit condo was built, and as you're heading south on McClellan, you can see it up on the hill there. The 8-unit condo was never built. The developers ran into some issues and basically went defunct, and that unbuilt condo ended up being foreclosed on by the county treasurer. So there was a lot of it was part of a condo. There was a lot of legal work that needed to be done to separate this property from the existing condo association. So we spent, I would say, a couple 2 to 3 years dealing with that issue alone. And then it came time to try to find somebody that wanted to develop the property. And it's a challenging site because it's small. There's not a whole lot of room to do a lot of units there. It has some terrain challenges. There's a very steep grade on the south side of the site. It took us a while to find somebody that could even put a feasible plan together. We do now have a development agreement with Innova Lab Developers, which is a firm out of Grand Rapids that really focuses on modular construction. So the plan for that site is to build 2 of what you see on your screen, so a total of 4 units. So they're 2-story duplex units with garages on the side. Our original hope was that these would be attainably priced. I haven't seen the cost come in yet. I'm waiting for the developer to share those with me. I don't know that these will be attainably priced because of the challenges with the site. We might be looking at market rate units for this condo development. So before I talk about our next project, our next housing project, I wanted to chat a little bit about these categories. And Sarah touched on this in her introductory. And I know also, I think it's tomorrow, Marilyn Crowley I've seen her slides, and she's going to get into even greater detail on what's affordable versus attainable versus market rate. But I stole this slide, I think from the State Land Bank. If Emily's on the line, thanks Emily for allowing me to steal this. And it really just kind of shows on one page this difference between affordable versus attainable and market rate. So those 3 categories on the left, there are multiple programs to support affordable housing development, and they talk about some of those in those boxes. The middle one, for example, low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, it's referred to as. Grandview Marquette is a good example of where LIHTC credits were used. On the west end, the Jasper Light Senior Housing Project is another example of where LIHTC was used. And in that third box, they talk about CDBG or home funded units. The attainable housing box, I like the description there. It works. Not eligible for assistance, but doesn't make enough for market rate units. And of course, we're talking about the families that are eligible for these units. That is the space that our land bank is looking to be in. We really feel like there's a missing incentive there for that type of development. There are quite a few programs, as I said, that exist for under 80% area median income. But this space of attainable housing or workforce housing is really our focus point. And I don't want to speak for other land banks in the state, but I get the feeling that that's how a lot of land banks feel, that is really their bread and butter when it comes to the housing development that it's looking at getting involved in. So this is kind of our second, I guess, attempt to get into this housing space and dip our toes in the water a little bit with this. The County Land Bank participated in a program called MISHDA Mod through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. And we built this home in the city of Ishpeming at 16 West Division. It's a small home, 960 square feet, 3-bedroom, 1-bath. It does have a full basement. We did outfit it with all new appliances, new stainless steel appliances, looks really sharp inside. You can see at the top of that slide, the income ranges that we're talking about. So that last slide kind of talked about, what does attainable mean? Well, in our county for this project, this is what attainable meant. For a family of 1 to 4, $83,000 income. Over 5 people, $109,680. That is the demographic of what this program was designed for. And I saw the listing of attendees. I know there are a lot of real estate professionals on this call. I guarantee you're dealing with a lot of families that fall into that price point. So that is the demographic we were looking that this particular program was designed for. Also, a thing I want to mention about modular housing. This program wasn't only designed to create workforce housing, but it was also an attempt to take the stigma away from modularly built houses. And so the concept was that you build this first home, it kind of serves as a spec home, people can walk through, they can see the quality, and then you can take this program and move it along and build more houses. We are not going to participate in MISHDA Mod going forward. We made that decision mainly because the communities that or the neighborhoods that they require us to build in have to be 50% above 51% low moderate income neighborhoods. And there aren't that many in the communities that we're working in that fit that bill. We do a lot of work in the city of Ishpeming. It really is a function of where our inventory is, but there are many lots that we own that are in an eligible neighborhood for this program that I know I could never sell a new constructed home. They're next to blighted rental housing. They're next to problem properties. They're not in a good neighborhood. And so we've been really strapped with our ability to build in the neighborhoods that we want to build in through this program. But I'll talk a little bit about how we hope to continue it kind of on our own without the state. The cost to construct and the selling price, very important on this project. Cost to construct was $194,000. And I should mention this was a Dickinson Homes, so local UP manufacturer, which was nice. This was before the prices went through the roof on construction materials. So keep that in mind. We had this price locked in before COVID. We sold that house for $168,000. It took us a while to sell it. I think our realtor that sold this house for us is on the line, and she and I were getting pretty nervous. The neighborhood was a challenge that we were kind of forced to build it in because of the program requirements. But you can see where we have this problem, right? We have this gap here between the cost to construct and the selling price. And you saw our fund balance. So we don't have the money to keep building these houses and absorbing the loss every time we sell. So we need to figure out a creative way to deal with this gap. So we are still looking at doing more. And I've got a couple of models on here just to give you some ideas, some other modular manufactured homes, some 3-bed, 2-bath options, little bit bigger than the one that we built. But you can see the prices. With a full basement and a garage, you're looking at $243,000. This is post-COVID prices. If you take away the full basement and do crawl space and no garage, you're still at $184,000 for a modular built home. And the next slide, I'm just going to show this quick, just an example, because we're talking about modular. These are some of the other designs that we've been looking at with some other developers. We think they have really good curb appeal and look really nice. And I just wanted to kind of show those for people to get an idea of the kinds of models that we're looking at. So back to this slide, these prices, keep in mind, assume no cost of land, right? Because they're owned by the Land Bank Authority. So there's no cost to the land and there's no developer profit. We didn't even in our Mishtamad project charge an administrative fee. It was myself and one of our planning staff, county planning staff, that managed the project and didn't recoup any administrative time through the project. So you can imagine if you add a developer profit and you add $10,000 to $20,000 for purchasing a lot, you've just inflated that gap even more, right? So it's becoming really difficult to get these homes built. Which communities, neighborhoods can we build these in where we can get these prices? We're finding that that's a challenge. So if we need to subsidize these, if we need to subsidize that gap, where will the funding come from? So we have applied, the Land Bank has applied for an MDAR grant, just submitted it a couple weeks ago for $130,000 to fund appraisal. We call it appraisal gap. So we will find out in March if we were successful with that. ARPA funds, America Rescue Plan Act, for those of you who don't know the acronym, the county board actually had a work session yesterday and they have put $400,000 into a bucket to support attainable housing through the Land Bank Authority. $200,000 of that is kind of slated for the appraisal gap funding, and $200,000 is slated to be kind of a construction loan financing mechanism, so that we use that $200,000 to build a home. We sell that home, person gets a mortgage, pays us back. We then have that money to build the next home. So that was very good news that they were supportive of our ask to use those monies. And it's not set in stone. They're still going to be going through several reiterations of that plan, but we're happy to see the county board has put value in this concept. The other one that I'm going to talk about next, pretty in depth, is brownfield TIF. There is a way to use a brownfield plan to use local tax increment to fund that appraisal gap. And we're going to talk about that next. So just some basics, some TIF basics for those of you who might not be familiar with tax increment financing. Land banks can make property eligible that may not have been eligible under the brownfield statute otherwise. So when we think about brownfields, we tend to think about contaminated sites, functionally obsolete sites. That's a site that can't be used for its intended purpose. To give you an example, here in the city of Marquette, the old bunny bread factory where the Staybridge Sweets is, now that was an functionally obsolete brownfield project. We think about blighted buildings. Those are all the typical brownfield categories that we think of in terms of brownfield development. Blighted property, however, includes any property owned or under the control of a land bank. So the crafters of this legislation for both brownfield and land bank really did recognize the synergies between the two agencies and the way that the land bank could promote development using the property in its inventory. So that's important. Another thing to point out in terms of brownfield is land banks can expand the activities that are eligible through a brownfield plan. So if anybody's familiar with some of the brownfield workings, we hear a lot about the projects going on in the city of Marquette. The city of Marquette is a core community, and the city of Ishpeming is a core community. And in those communities, not only can they do environmental cleanup and demolition and things like that through a brownfield plan, the developer can also get reimbursed for infrastructure costs, site preparation, and some other things. Infrastructure in particular, that's a big ticket item. That can make or break a development when you're talking about roads and water and sewer. So that benefit in a core community is really advantageous to a developer looking at brownfield financing. Land banks, any property owned or under control of a land bank, is eligible for the same core community eligible activities. To give you just a quick example of somewhere where we have used the land bank to in this way to get this core community status is in the city of Negaunee, which is not a core community. The Teal Lake Senior Living Facility right across from the lake, beautiful facility. That developer needed financing for the roads and the utilities to be put into that site. And because Negaunee was not a core community, brownfield couldn't be used. So we actually used the land bank creatively in that project to allow for those core communities to be reimbursed through a brownfield plan. And I've spoken to the developer and their project manager multiple times, and they've told me without the land bank and the brownfield tools, they would not have been able to do that development. So it's really a good example of how locally we can be creative to make some of this development happen. So how does TIF work? Basically, the new incremental taxes that are raised on a property are used to reimburse the developer, the land bank, whoever is developing the property, for those eligible activities that are described in a brownfield plan. So what is that tax increment? A developer comes to a site and there's, either a blighted building there or there's nothing going on that site, and it's worth, we'll use these numbers, it's worth, in this case, $3 million. They want to invest in that property. They want to build there, but they have some extra cost associated with that brownfield site, whether it's cleanup or demo or what have you. When they're done, when they're done developing their project, that property is going to be taxed on $5 million. That difference between that base of 3 and that increase of 5 can be captured to reimburse that developer for those eligible expenses. So they're not reimbursed for the entire project. They're only reimbursed for the eligible activities. And those, again, are all spelled out in a brownfield plan. And the local unit of government, the city, county, whoever's involved, needs to approve that brownfield plan, because essentially they're giving up their taxes for a period of time to support that development. This is just kind of another picture I stole from our brownfield consultant, Jeff Hawkins with EnviroLogic. I think he's also on the call. Thanks, Jeff. I like this because it shows kind of as a picture, you start off with that small base value in the orange, and you create this tax increment. And it's important to point out that the local unit of government continues to take in taxes on that base value in the orange. And so the argument with brownfield is that if you don't offer the incentive, that big greenhouse there will never be built, right? And you'll continue getting that orange base value forever and ever. By offering that incentive, you're giving up that increase for a period of time, but at the end, you get the increased tax base in your community. So how can this work with housing? That quote at the top is an important one. Assistance in selling or otherwise conveying property owned or under control of a land bank fast track authority is considered an eligible expense. So this gap that we talked about previously, in this case, $40,000 in this example, that gap is a brownfield eligible expense. So a local unit of government could pledge its tax base for a period of time to fund that gap and support an attainable housing project. The land bank and the brownfield statutes are very clear that this is, the intent was for these two agencies to be able to work together to make these types of projects happen. And this just gives kind of an example of how that 40,000 would look getting paid back over time. So again, this slide just really talks about the statutes, the collaboration, the redevelopment between the two entities, and that Act 381 and the Land Bank Public Act 258 really do reference each other. And really, and I do this work, so I'm living it and breathing it every day, but I really truly believe that brownfield and land bank are two of the most powerful economic community development tools that local units of government have available to them. It really gives you a creative way to deal with challenges in your community. So there are a lot of communities talking about using TIF to support attainable housing. And we mentioned this local task force that we've formed. We have been talking about that. For example, could the 3 cities come together and do a multi-jurisdictional brownfield plan to support attainable housing? I go back to those examples with showing the gap and the $240,000 model or whatever it was, and the fact that we can't get those prices in the west end of the county. You can build those houses all day long and sell them in the city of Marquette at $225,000 to $240,000. However, that's not hitting that demographic that the city is trying to hit. And so you have different communities with different reasons for reducing that price. But that tool through that brownfield TIF can be used in the same way to achieve that. There are, I hear somebody coined it on one of our meetings, brownfield fatigue. Some of the, I think particularly in the city of Marquette, there's a little bit of brownfield fatigue. How much longer are we going to give up our tax base to support these projects? And believe me, I'm a county finance manager, and my number one issue that I deal with is the county's budget, which 80% of that is based on taxable value. So if there's anybody working in a municipal environment that doesn't like giving up taxable value, it is me. But having worked with these two agencies and seeing what's happening with housing, and that the development community is just not filling this void, I really feel like this is a creative way that these tools can be used to address this problem. And I know Marilyn Crowley is, going to get into the development and the profit and why developers aren't interested in this market a little bit more tomorrow. Before I go to questions, there was one question about legislative, are we sharing this with our legislators? I just wanted to chat real quick from a land bank perspective on that. The Michigan Association of Land Banks, as I said, I'm currently serving as president of that organization. We are a member in the Coalition for a Strong and Prosperous Michigan, which is made up of a lot of different groups, including MML, MAC, lots of different agencies are part of that coalition. And so we are a part of that. We are doing our own legislative outreach to emphasize the need for some of the American Rescue Plan Act dollars to go into housing, to be offered to us at the local level for these kinds of housing projects. And the other thing, I just want to do a shameless plug, even though my presentation was focused on land bank, I do want to mention with the County Brownfield Authority, because I know there are a lot of realtors on this call, so just to let everybody know, the County Brownfield Authority does have an EPA assessment grant right now. Super competitive grants. We are thrilled that we were approved for this money. It's $300,000, and that money can be used for assessment work. So phase 1 environmental studies, phase 2 environmental studies, the cost of preparing a brownfield plan, asbestos surveys, all of that upfront assessment work that needs to happen before a project happens. We have grant funds available for that. So I wanted to just real quick share that information as well for those of you on the call. I know I've thrown a lot of information at folks, and I would love to answer any questions.
Thank you, Anne. So a lot of great information, and this is a really complex tool, and I think you did a great job of making that really clear and understandable. We have one question to start with. We have so many empty commercial properties in Marquette. Can these programs be used to try to develop multi-unit housing in partnership with the property owners? And they reference the old bank building. Can you talk about how the Land Bank Authority might be able to partner with property owners on empty commercial properties?
Sure. I'm trying to think of how the land bank would actually add an incentive to that. Of course, brownfield financing could be used depending on the types of work that they need to do in those buildings, whether it's interior demo, for example, or some of those kinds of things. Some of that, though, some of the challenges I see with that is zoning. And maybe that's something that our city panel can address in terms of zoning. Typically, commercial properties are not zoned to allow for that kind of development, so that would be one challenge to overcome. The land bank has acquired property to hold for development purposes to support economic development. I have one example in the city of Ishpeming where we acquired a property that had some contamination, and we held that property while we got funding through Eagle to clean up that site and then transferred it to the developer. There are things that we can do to assist. We would definitely, knowing our financial situation and the fact that we don't have a lot of funding to fall back on, we would definitely need to make sure that we were protected from liability and that there was other significant investment coming in on the project. As far as the old bank building, I mean, that's downtown. So being in a downtown, I mean, I don't want to get too into state incentives, but being in a downtown certainly opens up a lot of incentives through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and others to make those kinds of projects happen outside of downtowns. It's definitely a little bit more of a challenge.
Okay, thank you. So that question kind of implies another question that I hear often, and I think you might have touched on it, but just to clarify the ownership question in terms of participation with the Land Bank Authority, it does not have to be owned by the county in order to participate in the Land Bank Authority as a project?
In order to get some of the incentives that I talked about, it does need to be owned or under the control of a land bank. That under control, we've researched that a little bit to, could that be a long-term lease or whatnot? There is some advantage there. The one thing that I would point out is when we're talking about, if we're talking about the city of Marquette is already a core community. So some of those advantages that I talked about in terms of opening up the eligible activities to the brownfield plan by using the land bank, you already have those in the city of Marquette. You already have those in the city of Ishpeming. So some of those things are available already. And frankly, I mean, this is a good point, a good time to point out that we do actually have multiple brownfield authorities in the county, not to confuse everyone, but we have a city brownfield authority. We do actually have one in Negaunee Township. And then we have the county brownfield authority that kind of represents all the municipals that don't have their own. But so you have a brownfield authority in the city of Marquette that could be used in this way. If the city authority doesn't feel like it fits their objectives, you can use the county authority. We can overlap. And so there's probably multiple ways that the land bank and brownfield could get involved in a project like that.
Okay, thank you. And similarly, if a municipality owns property, that's something that, again, if there was a partnership with the Land Bank Authority, can you explain how that would work if the city wanted to if a city wanted to participate with their publicly owned property?
Yeah, we have actually, when I talked about the TL Lake project in the city of Negaunee, we literally deeded that property into the land bank and back out in a week's time to be able to use that tool. So it's possible to work together to do those kinds of things. And, of course, we had a lot of legal development agreements and documents drawn up to facilitate that transfer. But it's been done and it can be done.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you. Given the complexity of the process and the tool, I think one of the challenges in actually using the Land Bank Authority is just developing that level of understanding that everyone needs to be comfortable with the process before a project unfolds. Do you have any suggestions on how we might be able to kind of elevate the level of understanding about land bank authorities and where communities might want to start if they're interested in using this as a tool?
Well, and I think, doing things like this are certainly important and getting the word out about the tools. But I will be honest, we've had about 10 brownfield plans adopted through the county, and brownfield TIF it's a confusing concept to put your brain around. And I sometimes will meet with a developer 3 or 4 times before it clicks with them. Oh, this is how it works. And sometimes we'll adopt the brownfield plan, and when it gets to the point of me reimbursing them, they forgot it all already. So it really can be tough to for people to get their head around the concepts and how they work. But I guess that in this maybe isn't a great answer, but that's what I'm here for. That's what we're here for, is to try to walk people through that process and guide them through that process. So I always tell people, reach out to me, let's meet, let's talk through your project and see if there's a potential to use these tools.
Okay. And we have actually kind of going back to a question from an earlier session with the Intergovernmental Housing Task Force, which Anne has been really active and helpful in. We've had some conversation about actually providing presentations to units of government so that they're familiar with this as an option, and so that the community has just has an awareness that it's out there. The other thing I would mention is that MIDA, the Michigan Economic Developers Association, is putting together a guidebook on, oh, Jeff Hawkins already said it, is putting together a how-to guide for using brownfield tax increment financing for funding that selling and conveying gap for attainable housing. And that's anticipated to be released in early 2022. But there's a lot of great information. I've seen an early draft of that, and there's, I think, a lot of really great resources included in that. So we'll make an announcement when that is available so that everyone who participates is aware that that's out there. We have a question on who the contact might be for the Elgin County Land Bank Authority.
I'm feeling bad because I forgot her last name. And so I was banging around looking it up, but Pam Johnson is the treasurer, the county treasurer in Elgin County. So I would start with contacting Pam. And you'll find that in a lot of these smaller UP counties, it typically is the county treasurer that's your point person in terms of land bank opportunities.
Okay. And just with the having a little bit of extra time here, and I hate to put you on the spot here. I guess I'll wait on my question. There's another one that just came through. There was a development in the city of Marquette that was recently turned down because of the site choice. Was that a land bank development site?
So I had not been approached by the developer or the city about that specific project. So I don't know anything other than what I read in the media that came out after that meeting. But I do think, based on what I read, that they were hoping to use the land bank in an attempt to, I guess I shouldn't even guess if it was an attempt to provide appraisal gap funding for that development, or if there were infrastructure needs. There could have been all the above. But yeah, I think that was the intent. But again, I have very, very limited understanding of what was proposed there.
Okay, thank you. So kind of relatedly, and going back to the question I was going to ask earlier, there was a comment earlier about reusing empty commercial buildings for housing, and understanding that there's some zoning challenges with that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about why redevelopment of those properties is so challenging, and why brownfield is an important option for those? And I guess I'll preface that with, we hear a lot of interest in redeveloping these empty parking lots or empty commercial buildings. I think it makes a lot of sense to people on the surface that we would redevelop them for housing. I think it makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels, but there are challenges in redeveloping those properties that maybe you could talk a little bit about, and how brownfield plays into that.
Yeah, so definitely not buildings that are designed for that purpose. And I'm no construction expert, so I won't pretend to be, but one of the challenges we run into all the time is people want us to do rehab. Rehab's really expensive. And we've done a few rehab projects in an attempt to at least be in that space, and it takes a perfect candidate to make it happen. We don't always have perfect candidates, but anytime you're dealing with an existing structure, it's going to make things more complicated. But say you want to tear it down and build totally new, that tear down cost is a brownfield eligible expense. So, that right there, whether it's asbestos abatement or if there's environmental work that needs to be done on the site, all of those could be put into a brownfield plan and reimburse that developer. And the whole point of brownfield is really to put these problem challenging properties on a level playing field with a property down the road that has no challenges, right? So it's really an effort to incentivize the developer to take a look at this property instead of just building new and doing some more of the sprawl thing, right? So There are definitely eligible expenses, and if anybody's interested in seeing a listing of eligible expenses, we do have, my brownfield consultant has a great spreadsheet that I reference often that talks about the different items that are eligible in a brownfield plan. So those are definitely, I guess, things to consider when people are looking at those sites. But I hate to go back and throw it back at the city and township planners, but it really does become kind of a planning issue. Do you want residential in your core commercial corridor? And again, I'm not a planner, so I don't want to speak to that, but maybe the local panel can address that issue. Sometimes it just doesn't fit with what makes sense for the municipality.
That's a topic that's been getting a lot more attention lately, I think, nationally and statewide. And there's actually some proposals to create a funding source for converting not empty commercial space specifically, but office space, which really took a hit after COVID, for conversions of empty office space into residential development. So I'm hopeful that there's a similar initiative to address some of those empty commercial buildings.
And it's important to understand on these large scale projects that you're going to have layers of incentives. Maybe the land bank's part of it, maybe brownfield is a piece of it, maybe there's a program through MEDC that's a piece of it, maybe you're getting financing through the LSCP's revolving loan fund. I mean, any of these projects, these larger scale projects, to pull them off, you've got multiple partners and multiple layers of financing and incentives to make them happen. And I would just say anything that I can do to help connect people with those different partners, I'm happy to do that. And I know the staff at the LSCP is as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll, without seeing any other questions here, we can break a little bit early and come back a little bit after 3 for our next discussion with our local government panel. And I guess I'll just say, as I mentioned earlier, Anne's been a part of that, and land bank authorities and land bank authority tools have been a part of the conversation there. So we really appreciate her knowledge and participation in that. There is one final question here. Oftentimes when current older homeowners want to make a change of lifestyle, when they do sell their current homes, they do not qualify for subsidized home development. How can you help with this? That's a pretty complicated question. I think, so I'll take a stab at it and see if Anne has anything that she'd like to add. But the state does have income thresholds for subsidized housing opportunities that essentially provide affordable housing for people, including seniors. If you're outside of that threshold, you don't qualify and you don't get assistance. And it's really challenging in today's housing market, where I think Anne's definition of attainable housing kind of said it. You don't qualify for subsidized housing, but you don't afford enough. You don't make enough or earn enough to afford a market rate unit. And so there's a gap, a lot of people falling through the cracks there. And a lot of the discussion, I think, on the part of locals to state agencies and legislators has been, we need some more flexibility in state programs so that we can serve more of our community and actually create different types of housing, different price points of housing that can support our workforce and our seniors and others who aren't able to buy into the market at the at the level it is right now.
Right, and I talked. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I talked a little bit about some of the restrictions with the Mishtamad program and how we ran into issues with choosing our sites because of the state requirements from how to participate in their program. And the beauty of using the land bank and local TIF is that you do have that flexibility. So if a community came to us and said, we're not stuck on this 120%. We'd like you to go up to 130%. We'd like you to go up to 140%. If that's what the community wants, our general philosophy is that we're just a tool. We're not here to tell you what works best for your community. We're a tool that's here to make a project happen in your community. And so I guess, and I'm not saying that our focus is the attainable housing space. So I don't know that the land bank would get super excited getting into the market rate segment. But the point is that when you're dealing with local money, you have a lot more flexibility, and that is helpful in making some of these projects work.
Absolutely. Thank you for that explanation. And I think if you join in for the housing policy discussion tomorrow morning, you'll hear a little bit more conversation about that issue, about creating more flexibility at the local level, and what it would take to convince the state to play along with that. So great question.